And that comes from a research study standpoint, two parallel tracks of research. One was done actually in mice, because we have a mouse lab also where we can probe around in different brain areas and try and figure out what interesting brain areas we might want to probe around in humans, and showing that first might seem a little bit obvious, but the mechanisms are not, which is that there are really three responses to fear. You can pause, you can freeze essentially, you can retreat, you can back up, or you can go forward. And there's a single hub of neurons in the middle of the thalamus, which is a forebrain structure. And depending on which neurons are active there's a much higher probability that a mouse, or it turns out, or a human will advance in the face of fear, or will pause, or will retreat. Now, that just assigns a neural structure to a behavioral phenomenon. But what's interesting is that it turns out that the lowest level of stress or autonomic arousal is actually associated with the pausing and freezing response. Then, as the threat becomes more impending, and we used visual looms in this case, the retreat response has a slightly higher level of autonomic arousal and stress. So think about playing hide and go seek and you're trying to stay quiet in a closet that you're hiding. If you're very calm, it's easy to stay quiet and still. As your level of stress goes up, it's harder to maintain that level of quiet and stillness. You see this also in animals that are stalking. A cat will chatter its teeth. That's actually sort of top-down inhibition and trying to restrain behavior. So the freeze response is actually an active response, but it's fairly low stress. And what was interesting to us is that the highest level of autonomic arousal was associated with the forward movement toward the threat. So in your case, jumping out of the plane. However, the forward movement in the face of threat was linked to the activation of what we call collateral, which means just a side connection, literally a wire in the brain that connects to the dopamine circuits for reward. And so when one safely and adaptively, meaning you survive, moves through a threat or toward a threat, it's rewarded as a positive experience. And so the key, it actually maps very well to cognitive behavioral therapy and a lot of the existing treatments for trauma, is that you have to confront the thing that makes you afraid. So otherwise you exist in this very low level of reverberatory circuit activity where the circuits for autonomic arousal are humming, and they're humming more and more and more. And we have to remember that stress and fear and threat were designed to agitate us so that we actually move. So the reason I mention this is I think a lot of times people think that the maximum, stress response or fear response is to freeze and to lock up, but that's actually not the maximum stress response. The maximum stress response is to advance, but it's associated with reward. It has positive valence. So we've been spending a lot of time in humans and in animals exploring what it takes to get people comfortable to go to that place, and also to let them experience how there are heightened states of cognition there. There's changes in time perception that allow you to evaluate your environment at a faster frame rate, essentially. This is the matrix, as a lot of people think of it. But we tend to think about fear as all the low-level stuff where things aren't worked out. But there are a lot of different features to the fear response. And so we think about it quantitatively, and we think about it from a circuit perspective in terms of outcomes, and we try and weigh that against the threat. So we never want people to put themselves in unnecessary risk, but that's where the VR is fun, because you can push people hard without risk of physically injuring them.